I'm Kristen, and I blog at Rage Against the Minivan, and I wanted to share some of my impressions from my first experience at the IDEA camp. The IDEA camp I attended was specifically for orphan care, and I understood just a bit about the IDEA camp before I went. I knew that it was a more postmodern approach, and I knew that their philosophy was basically that there is wisdom in every participant. And so while I really liked the idea of that model, as a presenter at a breakout session, it was a little bit stressful going in, not really knowing what people would be bringing to the table. But I have to say I was really pleasantly surprised. So many of the attendees were people that are really kind of in the trenches in terms of orphan care work. There were a ton of people there that work for various NGOs on the ground and here in the US. A lot of people involved in the foster care system, people involved in the HIV crisis, people involved in eradicating human traffic. It was really quite an inspiring kind of cast of characters that were there in terms of people who really care and are, really putting their actions where their passion lies. So I really appreciated that. Another thing that I was really excited about was the fact that this was a really comprehensive look at orphan care. I think oftentimes when I see people that are really passionate about orphan care, they tend to fall on one extreme or the other. They tend to be really excited about adoption, which is great, but that can be a bit short-sighted in this idea of just like, okay, there's orphans and let's just get them all adopted. But the truth of the matter is, and something that I learned at the IDEA camp, is less than 2% of orphans around the world who do not have parents will not be adopted. So, when we look at the orphan crisis, 98% of children who are living as orphans will not be adopted and they need care. So, when we're looking at just the adoption side, we're kind of missing things. And then I also think that it's important for people to recognize that not every child is available for adoption or should be adopted. And that we should really be figuring out ways to get kids with their family of origin when that is possible. And then adoption should be there to care for the kids that don't have a family to take care of them or whose families have abandoned them or don't want to care for them. And so I liked that this was, definitely a topic of interest, both adoption and the prevention of orphans and what to do with children who, aren't eligible for adoption, and then family preservation. So I really liked that. The other extreme that I see people falling on is that no children should be adopted, that there is corruption in adoption, so we should shut the whole thing down, or that kids should be left in their birth cultures because they might have identity issues if they're removed. And again, I think that side can be a little short-sighted as well, because ultimately children will fare better psychologically in a family environment. There are lots and lots of studies that show that to be true. And while I do agree, and that was definitely discussed at the IDEA camp, that there can be corruption in adoption and is corruption in adoption, I don't think that is an opportunity for us to say, let's just shut it all down. I think that's a little reactionary too. So I like that there was really a marriage there of people who kind of understand that adoption can be a good solution, but not a solution for everyone, and that we have to be looking at, all the different possibilities for orphan care and prevention as well. So the IDEA camp was basically broken up into a couple different segments. The first segment really talked about the global state of the orphan crisis. That was eye-opening for me even, and I feel like I, kind of have a good understanding, but just how many children are orphaned, how many are being affected by HIV/AIDS, how many are being affected by poverty, by war, and just that this, we're still looking at huge numbers of kids who are living without parents who are able or willing to take care of them. And then the second portion really talked about causes and ramifications, and I really appreciated that because it really delved into some of the root issues behind why children are orphaned. I think maternal health is a huge issue that was a bit eye-opening for me, just the understanding that if we can help women in childbirth and make sure that their access to health care in childbirth is better, then we'll have less orphans because less women will be dying during childbirth. And obviously poverty is a huge, huge root cause of children being orphaned, and I'm excited to see so many organizations that are looking to address that and trying to make sure that kids can stay with their families and that families are getting the resources that they need. The second portion, or the second day, started out with a focus on adoption and foster care. And again, I felt like it was just a really comprehensive look. I was able to speak to some of the issues that are involved in institutionalization and orphanage life for children, and what that looks like when they enter a home, and also what that looks like for them if they stay in the orphanage setting. And I was really pleased to have people, both prospective adoptive parents, and people that work on the ground in orphanages in third world settings, that were all kind of there to really speak into this. And I think we all sort of noted the same patterns that we see emerge in children who are cared for by multiple caretakers in a setting where the adult to child ratio is not great. And I'll share some of those learnings later, and I'll share my outline from that session. And then the last portion really talked about orphan prevention and what we can do to make sure that children are not orphaned, which I think is just a huge part of it. So again, I was just really pleased with what I learned at the IDEA camp, with just the really, kind of macro and micro look at orphan care, what that looks like on the global scale, but then also what it looks like for the individual child, which I think is really important too, because I think it is just too simple and easy for us to look at orphans and say, okay, let's get them home, let's get them fed, or let's teach them about God, and then we're not really looking at the psychological impact of what it's like for them to grow up without a family. So I was excited to see that that was really addressed there as well. And I came away feeling like there are a lot of people looking into this. I was excited to hear Gladney, which is one of the biggest adoption agencies out there, speaking of the ways that they're helping in terms of family preservation and orphan care on the ground. I was pleased to have chats with people from Together for Adoption Conference and the Christian Alliance for Orphans, and seeing that they're just, really on board with looking at this comprehensively as well. I feel like, the Christian adoption or foster and orphan care movement has gotten some hits and criticism, with the assumption that this is just this reactionary group of do-gooders who aren't really looking at all the issues. And I have to say, from my participation in that movement, that's not what I'm seeing at all. I'm seeing people who are really, really looking at the hard issues. So I was really pleased to see that. And what I would say coming out of it, just to stress to anybody who's interested in orphan care, that this is not an adoption movement exclusively. That if you think of orphan care and think, well, I don't want to adopt, I'm not in a position, that's not my life stage, or I'm not interested in that, there are still so many ways that you can get involved. It might look like mentoring a child who is from a domestic violence situation. It might look like being a CASA, court-appointed advocate for a child who's in foster care. It might look like just giving monetary support to the people who are on the ground in sub-Saharan Africa, caring for all the orphans there that are not eligible for adoption. So if there's any takeaway that I could impart, it's that there are many, many ways for people to be involved in the orphan care crisis, and there are many, many children who need our help and our assistance to make their lives a better place, so that if they are being raised in an institution, we can give them the best possible care and the best chance for them to go out into the world and to create their own families as adults.